two, one, two, three.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. I'm here today with Kolya Vitek. Kolya is, or maybe we should say was, a barista at Starbucks, joined the union, I think was instrumental, in fact, in forming the union, and, well, is now, I guess, is a barista out on strike at the moment. But there's a long and convoluted story. We've had several interviews on this topic over more than a year. How the union started, I think first at the College Town store. There were 3 Starbucks a year ago in Ithaca. College Town, next to the Commons, near the bus stop, and a drive-through on Meadow Street. After incidents with the grease trap overflowing in College Town and the workers there stopping work until it could be temporarily fixed, Starbucks closed the College Town store, I think using the grease trap as an excuse rather than fixing it, which seems a bit weird. And people went to other stores. There were many grievances. They went to the NLRB. And I guess it's been almost a year since we've heard from you and others on the Starbucks workforce. But at that time, College Town had closed, but there were contract negotiations. And perhaps, Kolya Vitek, you can start by telling us a bit about contract negotiations.
Sure. So Ithaca Starbucks baristas are in the unique position where even though in other union stores across the country, most stores haven't gotten past 5 minutes in bargaining, we have been through effects bargaining. Effects bargaining is like a form of bargaining that we went through after the College Avenue store shut down. Basically, it's bargaining over like what happens with our jobs now that this big change has happened in our employment, meaning that our like home store has been closed down. So after the College App store got shut down, we entered flex bargaining, which lasted a very long time. It lasted longer than it should have, and it stretched out. When they shut down the College Avenue store, they only gave us 7 days notice. So we only had 7 days to bargain before we had no jobs. So it was very an unfair situation where we had like no leverage in bargaining. Starbucks would not budge on anything that they did not want to budge on. They refused to give us severance for those that didn't want to stay with the company. And now we find ourselves entering effects bargaining once more now that they've shut down the remaining stores.
Well, you say now that they have. Technically, I think there's still a few days when maybe I should make it clear in a changing situation. Today is May 17th, 2023. More than a year since then all 3 stores voted overwhelmingly to unionize. And we reported on that. About a year since the College Town store was shut. Well, I just thought it was important to know exactly when today is. Yes, Starbucks recently announced that they were closing all 3 stores in Ithaca, like all those students never drink coffee or
Mhm. Yeah, it's just very clear that the decision was made by someone who has no part in the Ithaca community, that these three locations that are in like such prominent areas of our community are just going to be shuttered until the NLRB forces them to reopen.
Can the NLRB do that?
Yes. So many people have probably heard that the NLRB ruled the closing of the College Avenue store illegal. Following that ruling, it had to go to court for a decision to be made on that. The decision being like the remedy to the situation, which the most major one being the reopening of that store. And so we're still waiting on that decision to come out. We have lawyers who have been working on making sure that that decision includes the other two stores. So that once that decision comes out, all three stores will have to reopen.
Interesting. So you're actually hoping that the NLRB will prevail.
Yeah, we're assuming that they will.
Uh,
It's just a
I
matter of when.
I guess the question is which is bigger, Starbucks or the federal government?
Right.
So anyway, uh, as of a year ago, there were ongoing contract negotiations. Although my memory is that contract negotiations were going very slowly. So maybe you could say a little
You
about
mean
how
like
that
effects
was.
bargaining or regular bargaining?
Hmm.
Are you
I
speaking
I
about?
never understood that difference. So
Sure. So effects bargaining is just for what happens with our job after a store closure in this case. But there's also regular bargaining, regular contract negotiations going on over like our first contract as a union, meaning like our wages, healthcare, dress code, scheduling, things like that. And that one has been going very, very slowly. In Ithaca, we have only gotten 5 minutes into bargaining with the company because they walked out refusing to bargain with us after seeing that we had participants on Zoom. Recently, though, me and several of my coworkers went to Albany to attend a bargaining session for a store called Stuyvesant. Um, the strategy with our union is like, okay, if you guys don't want to have Zoom participants, then we're all just going to come in person. So a bunch of us from across upstate New York attended a bargaining session for the Stuyvesant store in Albany. There was like,
now you say, let me get it clear. This is a Starbucks store.
yes, this is a
Okay.
Starbucks.
Okay.
No,
A Starbucks store, and the location is called Stuyvesant,
yes,
but is in
the
Albany.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a Starbucks store in Albany that's called the Stuyvesant store. Um, and 30 to 40, I want to say baristas from all across upstate New York, obviously also including that store itself, came and corporate didn't walk out after 5 minutes. They actually stayed with us for about 6 hours. Um, and in that time, we really just read through our proposals with them, but it is a start. And it is like strangely somewhat promising, even though we did not make any agreements whatsoever. Um, it is a first step that needed to happen. So
Okay. So in some places, negotiations are proceeding. In Ithaca, they have tended to be very stuck. That's what it sounds like to me.
we've
Was
only
that a
had one date so far. It was in the fall, and we had Zoom participants. So the next, well, I guess we won't be getting another date now that I think about it. But yeah, if we were to have another one, we expect it to go as Albany did.
okay, interesting. But then toward, I guess, last winter, maybe going into spring, I started hearing about grievances, complaints from Starbucks union people, actually all over the country, I think, going to the National Labor Relations Board, NLRB. And can you say a bit about that?
Can you be a bit more specific about that?
Well, I can't be very specific because I never really knew much about it. As I say,
Yeah.
there is I mean, when there are to be very general, which is what I can be, uh, the federal government has the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB. And when workers have complaints, that is where they're supposed to take them to. And I believe Starbucks workers from Ithaca, but also from many, many other places, brought many, many complaints to this board,
Correct.
which
Yeah. I believe that there's something like 300 complaints at least filed across the board, which is a lot because in a
300 nationally.
in each complaint there's like many charges. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
it's like more than it seems. Um, and Ithaca was one of them, or if not more than one of them, at least one. And we obviously in our complaint charged Starbucks for illegally shutting down the College Avenue store for, well, we believe illegal, for the unjust firing of like 6 baristas and shift supervisors in Ithaca for a lot of disciplinary procedures that were unjust and retaliatory, um, changing of policy when it's like supposed to be laboratory conditions, and other unfair labor practices that they've been committing. It's been a lot. When I ended up testifying in court over these things, I was in there for like multiple hours talking about everything.
Well, I remember you and others talking about some of the situations in the store. I mean, I think the College Town grease trap was probably the most dramatic one. Um,
Mhm.
Maybe you want to repeat that, repeat a little about that.
Sure. So that situation happened within the month after we won our union. We had a grease trap in the College Avenue store that was not maintained. There were issues with it for years and years and years, honestly, as long as anyone can remember. And that day of that first strike, it finally overflowed. Grease all over the floor, chemical. There was like, I'm not familiar, but my friend knows more about the grease trap was saying that it was like releasing a chemical that is not safe. And you could actually smell it in the front. So customers could smell it. And our store manager that day was, telling people to keep working through it. And to clean it up also, which it's really nasty. So I wasn't actually there that day, but my shift supervisor, Benjamin, talked to the other baristas and was like, how would you guys feel about going on strike over this? Because this is ridiculous. And everyone was like, yes. And so that was the one of the first strikes in the Starbucks Workers United campaign. So it was a really big deal. It was really historic. I woke up to like 100 text messages on my phone and I was like, okay, I'll be there. Um, and it was, a very empowering moment to like really feel our power and be like, yes, like we make the coffee, we make their money, and we can withhold that at any moment. And in this case, it was like particularly justified because it was an unsafe situation. But it was really powerful. It was a good day.
Right. It was a Saturday, I
Mm,
remember.
right.
And I remember that the word from the manager had been, "Oh, we can't do anything about this until Monday, so just keep working through the weekend."
Right.
Um,
Right.
I think
Well,
DSA
that's
must
so
have put out,
funny.
I was going
It's
to
funny
say,
that you say that. Sorry, but continue.
oh, I was going to say, I think DSA must have put out the call come that everybody should come up to, join the picket line
Yeah,
because I remember
probably.
scampering up there.
Great.
Uh,
Yeah, but it's funny that you mentioned that that our manager said that nothing could be done till Monday because we went on strike, someone came in that day to fix it.
yeah, I remember even, I think I even saw it. I think I was even on the line
Yeah.
there at that moment when, I mean,
Yeah,
it was a temporary fix as I understand it, but
right,
these these people who clean out all the, you know, messed up stuff and have the equipment to do it and the experience.
right.
I mean, uh, we've had them in our basement too at home.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Um, but it's not work that you hand over to someone whose job it isn't to do it.
Right. Exactly.
Uh, I mean, in our home, it was tree roots growing in in our sewer.
Oh my
Okay, so anyway, complaints taken. That was a bit of a digression, but complaints taken to the National Labor Relations Board. But apparently, that is a two-step procedure because then it has to go to a more formal court.
Right. So the NLRB makes a complaint and then it has to be tried in court and an administrative law judge, an ALJ, makes the decision. And that judge is like under the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board. So right now where we are at is that the trial has happened and we're just waiting on the ALJ to make the decision. N- don't have any expectations as to the timeline. This whole process, I am just like keeping my expectations low. And when good news comes out, it's a good surprise. Because unfortunately, as we've all been seeing, the courts move really, really slow. And it's hard for like any justice to come in time.
Right. And we have to have some sympathy that they are dealing with essentially 300 cases at
Right.
once,
Yeah, it's a
each
lot.
one with multiple parts.
Yeah, it is a lot. It is a lot of
N
work.
Now, you also said that the mentioned that I guess the initial NLRB rulings brought out some new facts.
Yeah. After the trial was over, we got to look over some of the evidence that came out, and some of that was some emails between managers. That was not surprising, very validating, but still shocking. Um, one of them being that there was an email thread between like corporate executives, um, with the subject line being Cornell University strike. And that was very obviously pointing towards the College Avenue store strike because that store is like right off the Cornell campus. The beginning of the email started with like an article from the Ithaca Voice, I believe, or maybe Ithaca Times. I mix them up. Um, where I was quoted, other coworkers were quoted, and all of these like corporate executives were seeing this, and even Howard Schultz's like right hand man was uh was in this email chain. So Howard Schultz was seeing this, even though there's no direct proof of it.
For the
And
radio and television audience, maybe tell us who Howard Schultz is.
Howard Schultz is the founder of Starbucks, and he came back in as CEO after some of the first unions came about, but he recently left as CEO. But he still holds like a lot of influence in the company, and is kind of like the father of the brand. Um, but in that email chain that said the subject line was Cornell University strike, that is where they decided to shut down the store. So it doesn't get really more obvious than that. that and they were citing like pub. I don't really even remember off the top of my head, but I can send you the emails if you would like.
Well, no, that isn't going to help the audience.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, what sorts of stuff were they citing? Even if you have to sort of
Um,
summarize.
they were mostly talking about like how the PR was bad. And so it was just obviously like retaliation for us being on strike, and making national news because it was like a really like historic strike. Um, yeah, and they also in that email chain talked about how the closure itself wasn't permanent, that their plan this whole time has been to close the store and then reopen at another convenient time. So they lied to us because when they told us that the store was closing, they told us it was permanent. So that is also pretty egregious to me that they would lie to
So
us.
they
Like,
wanted you to go away.
yeah, yeah, they just want us to go away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Mhm.
I was going to say, I think that when they said Cornell University strike, they were perhaps a little bit prescient, um, because one of the most recent incidents is that a couple of weeks ago, just toward the end of classes at Cornell, students working together with Starbucks workers. Well, hey, that's not necessarily two different groups. There are people who are both Cornell students and Starbucks workers.
Mhm.
Uh, star essentially petitioned the Cornell administration to break off its ties with Starbucks because in terms of other outlets for Starbucks in this area, there are numerous Cornell campus eateries where the workforce is hired by Cornell, but the products they serve are bought from Starbucks.
Yeah, I could talk about that. Excuse me. Um, so a bunch of Cornell students were, rightfully outraged about the situation, especially since some of their classmates are involved. Um, them shutting down every single Starbucks store in Ithaca is so blatant and outrageous and egregious. And, you know, if you think about it for like, if you think about it a little bit, if you take a second to really think about what's going on, you'll see that it doesn't just affect the baristas that are currently employed. It affects us all. Like what Starbucks can get away with says a lot for what any company can get away with and what they can treat the working class in general. So this is not just like an issue for the 40 workers employed by Starbucks currently, but like an issue for the working class as a whole. And so it really moved me that Cornell students saw that and acted in a way that was just like completely appropriate. Um, in the
Indeed.
course of 3 days, they mobilized themselves to do a large rally and then an occupation of the administration building on Cornell campus called Day Hall, where they stayed there until the police threatened them 2 hours after the building was closed, and they camped out that night. And the next day they came back and got part of their demands met by Cornell and have a meeting to follow through with kicking Starbucks off campus. So they're doing a lot of great work, and we're expecting it to hit Starbucks and be painful.
I think the very latest episode, and you've alluded to it before, but let's just bring it up here at the end, is that as of today, May 17th, 2023, Starbucks has announced that all three, let's say the remaining two Ithaca stores will be closed. And what was their date for closing?
26th of May.
May 26th. Okay. So like in 9 days. But meanwhile, only one is actually I think one is actually working still, right?
Right. My store, the Common Store, has been on strike since the 10th. It felt really weird going back to work after the news. And my coworker Talia was the one who first said this, but it feels really true to me that it felt really strange to go to work and talk to our regulars and say hi, welcome to Starbucks, as if we weren't all losing our jobs 2 weeks from now. It just felt wrong and doesn't, we feel like we need to do something. We need to fight and show Starbucks that there are consequences to their actions, that we won't just take this lying down. But even more than that, us going on strike and withholding our labor is about our dignity and our worth as human beings, being like, no, we won't stand for this. We deserve more than this. And that in itself is in a way really healing, when we've been abused by this company so much, especially through their union busting, just to be like, no, we're not going to take this anymore. You guys can deal with this. We're done.
Thank you, Kolya Vitek. We are still waiting to hear the court ruling, so there will undoubtedly be, you might say, a continuation at a later date. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 3.